Hades Victor Demon. Sorry. I just came up with a theory, of how gaming helmets could be theoretically made, or another possible thing, which I'll get onto later. Well, my theory is, you know how, we have computers and they work on electrical impulses. Well, when the brain is asleep, impulses are smaller. So, say you had a monitor of some kind, they could work off the fact that they could read electrical impulses. So, if a computer were hooked up to, say, a very small, flexible substance with someone who had a shaved or thin hair, or shaved hair, then we could do a test for those electrical impulses on the cranium, because electrical impulses flow through the entire body. So if in reading them you could 3D render using gaming technology, like the movements, each physical movement has an impulse for different things, so every aspect of the human body has its own impulse. So if we were to take a neurologist, an engineer, an electrician, somebody from Microsoft, like gaming designers, put them all together, they could theoretically read on, say, an animal, for instance, for testing, like a dog, which would not harm the dog at all. So you're just reading electrical impulses, so you just have the dog go to sleep on its own, so as not to cause any figuratively fake results, with a thing on top of its head, like a flat, flexible piece of microfiber or plastic, like gel, with the readers on it that read and pick up electrical impulses. Well, for each physical impulse, movement, thought, eyesight, rendering would be the same difference as a human walking around in a game with different readings. So for each physical action, the dog impulses, you could theoretically pick up on those impulses on that reader and then determine what the dog is doing through all of its actions, thoughts, processes, and when it's awake, you could read the same impulses and interpret it as it's acting. So if it's moving, well, match the impulse with the thing in the sleep, and then over a period of like 6 months, you could theoretically determine an entire code structure for an animal. So you have a human do that. Well, then you've just basically interpreted its dreams, what it's doing. You could basically re-render a small world. But the problem with that is self-creating that. Well, to use that, you would have to induce sleep. So if you could figure out what the impulse that's causing the sleep, or see, when you're transferring the dog from sleep to awake, there's an impulse or some kind of thing of molecular things, of chemicals and things. So if you were to induce a sort of dazed impulse state, you could interpret a false dream using impulses and 3D render an image into that, but I'll get into that in a minute. So if you were to gather, say, people who work on prosthesis, and a neurologist, and a psychologist for personal testing of per actions, people from Microsoft who render 3D gaming, arts, and otherwise, or Sony, for instance, you could put them together in a room with a couple engineers, electrical people. Since computers work off basic electrical impulses, and humans have impulses that equal movement, as I said, for every action, there's a small impulse. Well, if they were to have a dog or a human, it doesn't really matter what kind of creature, as long as it's large enough to be picked up right off, they could generally, over a period of time, determine what each impulse read as, and then interpret what the dog is doing in its sleep. So if it's walking around, attacking, biting, moving, chewing, eating, they could determine and render a world where the dog is possibly doing. If it's peeing on a tree, they could render that the dog is near a tree based on its actions. And they could render a possible world through different impulses. See, the eyes work on impulses, so, or electrical waves and triggering of chemicals. So, by picking up these specific things, they can show a person or an animal visual images, and those chemicals or reactions in the body that it's being picked up on the reading system, or like plastic adhesive that's picking up different reactions in the body and physical things, could then thereof be interpreted through visual sight and interpreted through the body system through impulses, actions, chemical release. And then over a period of time, each one of those being read could then be interpreted for rendering. So I give it 2 years if they all work together. We could then have dream rendering, which would give the world the ability to see people's dreams, and or that in lies video game virtuality helmets, which technically in that logic would not be too far off. But other than that, I would suggestively say that with that we could probably use the different codes in video games to interpret numerical values through the impulses. So interpret the code through the values of numerals, and then take those impulses that are through visual and or cognitive properties and interpret them into code into a game version. So as the dog is operating on impulses, the Microsoft people could relate what they know of the actual impulses that the dog sees, hears things through pictures, actions, and sleep later on, and use that to create a visual 3D rendering of every aspect to show what the dog is technically doing, which would be a huge leap if they actually worked together and did that. Oh, by the way, go VR headsets. Anyway, I'm just starting out here, and anyway, I just thought I'd say this because I see a lot of VR headsets every day, and I figured why not put my 2 cents in that, one, it technically is possible to create a VR headset if people work together, but a better one. But it would definitely cause no harm, seeing how you're only reading impulses. You're not creating them. So, if you were to read impulses, you could, in fact, know which impulse is causing daze or sleep or form of imagery, which means, in sense, you could cause the helmet with a power source of minimal to create small impulses on the cranium to induce a dreamlike state, which would, in fact, based on the power source and minimum, cause no interactual problems, unless someone modified it to enhance the, which would probably most likely fry it anyway, so it would be pointless. Basically, it'd be electrical impulses, not microwaves, which would not, in fact, fry the brain. Like on that whole game movie, which, by the way, was a good anime, but, I mean, with the operation of electrical impulses, the worst that could possibly happen, well, I think you get it, but, with that, they could read it, and then later on induce it, so that you could make a fake impulse readed. So say you wanted to put a tree, well, the impulses could code out certain impulse electrics after they know everything about what could cause it, visual, scene, or otherwise, and fake those sensory imageries all together to create a visual plane of existence. And then if you connected multiple people to that same plane of existence of electrical impulse imageries, you could instinctively create multiple people in one plane if they're connected to the same imagery by sending them to, say, the helmet was wirelessly linked to a console. You, with the same imagery, could link the program that they're seeing through the helmet via the impulses in the system. So if the system is reading those impulses, you could set up a monitor causing each person to experience the same impulse thing. So when they're reading it, each person will perceive the other person's impulse of existence as within the same realm, and then someone would, okay, that person exists right there as an impulse. So if when that person moves, the impulse reader would know that that person's moving, and it would send the impulse to the other impulse person, and each person could perceive each other in the game by what they're doing, action, sight, sound, otherwise thought, motion, or otherwise action. Yeah. So in statistical scenario, someone could in fact create a VR headset if the right people were found. But it would take, my estimate, 6 months to 2 years if a small group of Sony, Microsoft's top people, or middle, or whatever, and a couple engineers, electricians, and a couple neurologists, prosthesis people who work with synapse in the connection of like arm to joint where no bone is there, so that they can read out functional waves, so that when someone doesn't have an arm, you know how they move it anyway with thought. So I mean, if they use that process, they could in fact create a VR controller that basically just sits on the head and reads impulses and or sends them out to show a visual image. So in fact, we'd be technically controlling the character. That and the advancement of that would show people's dreams, which would either scare the crud out of people or prove that people know stuff they don't actually know. But based on, the supposed thing that people see, foresight and stuff like that, well, people would remember the dreams even though they have no idea what they are if they were that, but they could be monitored that their dreams. But with this VR headset, I would suggest gaming would be the most likely probability, because there could be a huge tournament where millions of people get a grand prize based on playing, and you could involve like this huge tournament where there's many people who game are enlisted. No requirements necessary, all people invited. It could be really big, and then there could be this later on tournament thing. I wouldn't mind being invited, but as one of the main proctor creators, idealist people, one who can join in, and that whole scenario. But I'll get into that on a later episode possibility. But yeah, the VR headset would just basically read the impulses off the skull, the electrical synapse. Since supposedly you can hook things to a brain in that one movie and run a train around, well, the whole body runs on electrical impulses. Well, why not read those to determine and physically code out which one means what over a period of time? It probably would definitely not be that hard if Microsoft and Sony put a small band of people and a neurologist, an engineer, electrician, and a couple neurologists to determine brain sensitivity values, several coders, 3D renderers, and enlist 100 dogs, based on how many they put in, a certain amount of dogs, animals, different types, a couple of humans, to just go about their daily life, actions, sleep, while wearing this wireless thing on their head, while their head shaved, and then just ignore it, put a hat over it, and then they could determine different actions based on the readings and video of what they do. It wouldn't be like watching them. They'd basically just be doing it for an experimental testing project, to determine for the neuronic properties of what the values of wavelengths mean. But that, in theory, would create a VR headset that actually insanely works. And it would create a massive gaming crave and people wanting to join in. But yeah, that's my idea of how a VR headset could, in theory, be created. But Microsoft, Sony, and a few neurologists, psychologists, and or other few things would have to help to create it. Yeah, that. I think Sony and Microsoft, because they're two great companies, but they really could help each other. Apple could probably be helping too, but I don't know. Um, they would probably help because of their safety and not being able to hack into it. So, in all case scenarios, their safety system mixed with Microsoft's ingenuity and Microsoft's accessibility, Apple's hacker resistance, and um, Sony's wireless things, and basically all those guys could really do well together. Yeah. Anyway, just a non-profit thing that I just thought of to help better people, so I expect nothing other than to join in to the VR headset if it's created for thoughts, experiences, and or just helping. I don't expect compensation, but if they do create it, I would expect to join into the VR battle of contests as one of the leading things with the VIP pass. It's really cool from that. I don't know, just thought. Anyway, just thought I'd put my 2 cents in, but yeah. I mentioned all these people, but I expect nothing for profit from any of those companies. I just thought I'd tell them this, since I figured it would be, unique if they heard it. Just thought I'd say that. Be kind of cool if y'all work together. That'd be like the world renowned thing. They all did this together as one small company group, but just a thought. Yeah. Anyway, if you hear me, guys, give a shout out on the video and subscribe. This is Hades Victor Damon. My real name's not that, but it's a username, so just thought I'd let you know. If you're wondering, have a great day. Laters.